This is Cinderella by the brothers Grimm. Once upon a time the wife of a rich man fell sick, and as she knew her end was approaching, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Dear child, when I am gone continue good and pious, and heaven will help you in every trouble, and I will be your guardian angel." Soon after this the mother closed her eyes in death, and day after day the maiden went to her mother's grave to weep. But she never forgot her last words, and continued pious and gentle to all around her. Winter came and covered the grave with its dazzling drapery of snow, but when the bright sun of spring again warmed the earth, the husband had taken to himself another wife. This wife had already married, and she brought with her 2 daughters who were fair and beautiful in appearance, while at heart they were evil-minded and malicious. It soon became a very sad time for their poor stepsister, of whom they were very envious, and at last persuaded their mother to send her to the kitchen. "Is the stupid goose to sit in the parlor with us?" they said. "Those who eat ought to work. Send her into the kitchen with the kitchen maid." Then they took away all her nice clothes and gave her an ugly old frock and wooden shoes, which she was obliged to put on. "Look at our fine princess now. Look how she has dressed herself," they said, laughing and driving her into the kitchen. And there she was obliged to remain doing hard work from morning till night, and she had to rise early to draw water, to light the fire, to cook, and to wash. Besides all this, her stepsisters invented all sorts of ways to make her more unhappy. They would either treat her with scorn or else push her out of their way so roughly that she sometimes fell among the pea shells and cabbage leaves that lay in the yard. At night, when she was tired with her work, she had no bed to lie on, and when the weather was cold she would creep into the ashes on the warm hearth and get so black and smutty that they gave her the name of Cinderella. It happened one day that the father was going to a fair, and he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring back for them as a present. "A beautiful dress," said the eldest. "A pearl necklace," said her sister. "And, Cinderella," asked her father, "what will you have?" "Father," she replied, "please bring me the first twig that strikes your hat on the way home." So the father brought for his stepdaughters a beautiful dress and a pearl necklace, and as he was returning home he rode through a shrubbery, where the green bushes clustered thickly about him, and a hazel twig stretching across his path struck his hat. Then he stopped, broke off the twig, and carried it home with him. As soon as he reached the house, he gave his stepdaughters the presents they had wished for, and to Cinderella the hazel twig from the hazel bush. She thanked him for it even more than her sisters had done for their beautiful presents, and went out immediately to her mother's grave, where she planted the hazel twig, and wept over it so much that her tears fell and softened the earth. The twig grew and became a beautiful tree, and Cinderella went 3 times every day to pray and weep at the grave, and on each visit a little white bird would perch on the tree, and when she expressed a wish the bird would throw down whatever she wished for. After a time, the king of the country gave a grand ball, which was to continue for 3 days. All the beautiful young ladies in the land were invited to this ball, so that the king's son might make a choice of a bride from amongst them. The 2 stepsisters, when they heard that they were invited, knew not how to contain themselves for joy. They called Cinderella in haste, and said, "Come, and dress our hair and trim our shoes with gold buckles, for we are going to the ball at the king's palace." When Cinderella heard this, she began to cry, for she was fond of dancing, and she wanted to go with her stepsisters. So she went to her stepmother and begged to be allowed to accompany them. "You, Cinderella," cried her stepmother, "so covered with dirt and smut as you are, you go to a ball? Besides, you have no dress nor dancing shoes." Cinderella, however, continued to beg for permission to go, till her stepmother said at last, "There, go away into the kitchen. I've just thrown a shovelful of linseed into the ashes. If you can pick these seeds all out and bring them to me in 2 hours, you shall go." Away went the maiden through the back door into the garden, and called out, "Tame little pigeons, turtle doves too, if you don't help me, what shall I do? Come pick up the seeds, all the birds in the sky, for I cannot do it in time if I try." Then came flying in at the kitchen window 2 pretty white doves, and they were followed by all the birds in the air, twittering in a swarm, nodding their heads at Cinderella as they began to pick, and very quickly picked every seed from the ashes till the shovel was full. It was all finished in 1 hour, and then the birds spread their wings and flew away. Full of joy, the maiden carried the shovel of seed to her stepmother, believing that now she was sure to go to the ball. But her stepmother said, "No, Cinderella, you have no dress, and you have not learnt to dance. You would only be laughed at." Still she cried and begged so hard to be allowed to go that her stepmother, to keep her quiet, threw 2 shovelfuls of linseed in the ashes this time, and told her she should go if she picked all these out in 2 hours. She can never do that in time, thought the cruel woman, as Cinderella ran away to the kitchen. But the maiden went again into the garden and called the birds, "Little tame pigeons, turtle doves too, if you don't help me, what shall I do? Come pick up the seeds, all the birds in the sky, for I cannot do it in time if I try." Then the birds all came, as before, and in less than an hour every seed was picked out and laid in the shovels. As soon as they had flown away, Cinderella carried the shovels of seed to her stepmother, quite expecting now to go to the ball with her stepsisters. But she said again, "It is of no use to fret, Cinderella. You have no dress. You cannot dance, and were you to go, it would be a disgrace to us all." Then she turned her back on the poor girl and hastened away with her 2 proud daughters to the ball. There was no one at home now but Cinderella, so she went out to her mother's grave and stood under the hazel tree and cried, "Shake and shiver, little tree, with gold and silver cover me." Then the bird in the tree threw down a beautiful silk dress, embroidered with gold and silver, and a new pair of glittering golden slippers. In great haste she dressed herself in these beautiful clothes and went to the ball. When she entered the ballroom, looking so beautiful in her rich dress and slippers, her stepmother and sisters did not know her. Indeed, they took her for a foreign princess. The idea that it could be Cinderella never entered their heads. They supposed she was safe at home picking linseed from the ashes. The king's son took a great deal of notice of this unknown lady, and danced with her several times, till at last he would dance with no other, always saying, "This is my partner." So she danced all the evening till it was time to go home, and the prince said he would accompany her, for he wanted to discover where she lived. But she avoided him, and with one bound sprang into the pigeon house. The prince was quite astonished, but waited till nearly all the company had left, and then told his father that the strange lady was in the pigeon house. Could it be Cinderella? Thought the stepmother, who would not leave till the last. I must find out. So she advised the prince to send for workmen to pull down the pigeon house. This was soon done, but they found no one there. When the stepmother and her daughters reached home, they found Cinderella in her smutty dress, lying in the ashes, and a dingy little lamp burning on the chimney-piece. The truth was, Cinderella had slipped out from the back of the pigeon house even more quickly than she had jumped in, and had run to the hazel tree. Here she hastened to take off her beautiful clothes and lay them on the grave while she put on her kitchen clothes, and the bird came down and carried the ball dress away, while Cinderella went home to lie in the ashes. A short time after this, the king gave another ball, to which her parents and stepsisters were invited. As soon as they were gone, Cinderella went to the hazel tree and said, "Shake and shiver, little tree, throw gold and silver over me." Then the bird threw down a far more elegant dress than the first, and when she entered the ballroom in her rich apparel, everyone was astonished at her great beauty. The king's son, who refused to dance till she came, took her hand and led her to her seat, and during the whole evening he would dance with no one else, always saying, "This is my partner." Again, when it was time to go, the prince wanted to accompany her and find out her home, but she managed to avoid him, and rushed out into the garden behind the palace, in which grew a beautiful tree loaded with pears. She climbed like a squirrel between the branches, and the prince could not find her anywhere. When his father came home, they even ordered the tree to be cut down, but no one could be found among the branches. The stepmother still had a fear that it might be Cinderella, but when they returned home, there she was in her kitchen dress, lying among the ashes as usual. When they were looking for her, she had sprung down at the other side of the tree, and the bird in the hazel tree had brought her kitchen clothes and taken away the ball dress. A third fête took place, to which the stepmother and her daughters were invited, and Cinderella again went to her mother's grave and said to the tree, "Shake and rustle, little tree, throw gold and silver over me." Then the bird threw down a most magnificent dress, more glittering and elegant than ever, and the brightest pair of gilded slippers. When she appeared at the fête in this dress, everyone was astonished at her beauty. The prince danced only with her, and to every other proposal replied, "This is my partner." When the time came to leave, Cinderella wanted to go, and the prince wished to accompany her, but she darted away from him and vanished so quickly that he could not follow her. Now, the king's son had had recourse to stratagem in the hope of discovering the home of the lovely princess. He had ordered the steps of the castle to be strewed with pitch, so that as Cinderella hurried away, her left slipper stuck to the steps, and she was obliged to leave it behind. The prince himself picked it up. It was very small and elegant, and covered with gold. The next morning he sent for one of his servants and said to him, "None other shall be my bride but the lady to whom that slipper belongs, and whose foot it shall fit." When the stepsisters heard of this proclamation from the prince, they were delighted, for they both had small feet. The messenger went with the slipper from house to house, and the young ladies who had been present at the ball tried to put it on, but it would fit none of them, and at last he came to the two sisters. The eldest tried it on first in another room, and her mother stood by. She could have worn it if her great toe had not been so large, so her mother offered her a knife and told her to cut it off. "When you are queen," she said, "you will not want to use your feet much." The maiden cut the toe off and forced on the slipper, in spite of the pain, and the messenger led her to the prince. But on their road they had to pass the grave of Cinderella's mother, and on the hazel tree sat two doves who cried, "That is not the right bride. The slipper is much too small. Blood is flowing inside. The shoe does not fit her at all." Then the messenger examined the slipper and found it full of blood, so he led her back and told the next sister to try. He also went into another room with her mother and found that she could not get the slipper over her heel. "Cut a piece off," said her mother, offering her a knife. "When you are queen, you will not have to use your feet much." The maiden cut a piece off her heel and fitted on the slipper in spite of the pain, and then went to the prince. They also had to pass the grave of Cinderella's mother, in which the two doves still sat and cried, "Go back, go back. There is blood in the shoe. The shoe is too small. That bride will not do." So the messenger examined the shoe and found the white stocking quite red with blood. He took the false bride back to the house. This time the king's son went with him. "Hast thou not another daughter?" asked the prince of Cinderella's father. "None," he said, "excepting the child of my first wife, a little Cinderella. She cannot possibly be your bride." "Send for her," said the prince. But the stepmother answered, "Oh no, I dare not let you see her. She is much too dirty." But the prince insisted that Cinderella should be sent for, so at last they called her in. After washing her hands and face, she made her appearance and bowed to the prince, who offered her the golden shoe. She seated herself on a footstool, took off the heavy wooden shoe from her left foot, and slipped on the golden slipper, which fitted her exactly. Then, as she lifted up her head and looked at the king, he recognized the beautiful maiden who had danced with him at the ball, and exclaimed, "That is the right bride!" The stepmother and her two daughters were in a dreadful rage when they heard this, and turned white with anger. But the prince disregarded their anger, and taking Cinderella on his horse, rode away with her. As they passed the hazel tree on the grass, the two white doves cried, "Fair maid and true, no blood in her shoe, she is the bride, with the prince by her side." As they rode by, the doves came and perched on Cinderella's shoulders, one on the right and the other on the left. When the marriage day came, the two stepsisters, wishing to share Cinderella's fortune, contrived to be present. As the bridal party walked to church, they placed themselves one on the right and the other on the left of the bride. On the way, the doves picked out one eye from each of them. When returning, they changed places, and the doves picked out the other eye of each, so they were, for their wickedness and falsehood, both punished with blindness during the rest of their lives.